Good afternoon, everyone. I welcome you all for the virtual tour of University of Guelph Sensory Facility organized by the CIFST Student Committee. We are very happy to have you all here today to learn about sensory science and explore the fascinating world of flavor and food experiences. It's truly our honor to introduce today's speaker, Lisa Dizer, Department Chair and Professor in Department of Food Science at University of Guelph. Professor Dizer has been the faculty member in the Department of Food Science since 2009. Her research interest focuses primarily on sensory aspects of food, including taste and texture. She works on creating foods that are not only healthy but also tasty and appealing to everyone. Today, she will provide an overview of sensors and sensory testing to discuss the different approaches that are used to measure sensory properties of food. Following her presentation, we will enjoy a virtual tour of the University of Guelph Sensory Facility. We encourage everyone to stay focused, participate in the activities, and share your questions in the chat for our Q&A segment. Before we get started, a heads up, we are wrapping up it with a quiz, and the two winners will get gift vouchers. So without further delay, it's my great pleasure to welcome Lisa Dizer and Professor Dizer. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Vithushana. I have shared my slide deck. I'm assuming everybody can see it. Vithushana, can you see it? Excellent.
Yes.
All right. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today. Farah has asked me to provide basically an outline of sensory evaluation. And here we have presenters. So Vithushana, I guess I should have advanced the slide. Farah had asked me to talk a bit about sensory evaluation and about some of the sensory testing that goes on at Guelph. And so what I'm going to cover today in the next 20 to 25 minutes is a really quick overview of our senses and how it is that we perceive the taste, flavors, and textures of food. Then talk about how we can measure that, and I'm using examples from our lab for doing that. And then we'll end with a tour of the University of Guelph sensory facilities. And I'm going to caution you that I am the recorder of the video, and I am not very advanced in my recording techniques. So apologies for when you get to the video. I tried my hardest. So I want to start with just basically a really quick introduction into what sensory evaluation is. And I start all of the lectures that I give in sensory evaluation at the beginning of the year with this definition so that we can all be grounded in what it actually is. And it's important to remember that it is a scientific method. And what we're doing with the scientific method is evoking, measuring, analyzing, and interpreting responses to products. And it doesn't always have to be food. It can be non-food products as well. Anything that a human person would be coming in contact with can be tested using sensory evaluation. And we're using all of our senses to do that. So it's perceived through sight, smell, touch, taste, and hearing. And so if we take a closer look at our senses and how we use them when we are conducting sensory testing, what we will often do in the first instance is smell the food. And there are two different mechanisms for us to be able to do that. One is using orthonasal olfaction, and the second is using retronasal olfaction. So orthonasal olfaction happens when you actually put the product close to your nose and you sniff up into your nostrils. And the volatiles that are produced by the food or the beverage are going up into your olfactory region in order for you to help to perceive what the odor of that food is. We also can do this retronasally, where what we do is we put the product in our mouth and the volatiles are released from the product as it's broken down, or in the case of a liquid, as it's moving from the front of our mouth to the back of our mouth in order for us to be able to perceive those volatiles. And again, they travel into our olfactory region, and together, both of these experiences allow us to perceive what it is that food product smells like. Once you have that food product in your mouth, then you actually start to think about the tastes of the food. And with regard to taste, we know we have 5 basic tastes: sweet, sour, salt, bitter, umami. Fat is also a taste that has been postulated as being a taste, and there are people who have suggested that fat is a taste. But really, I'm just focusing on sweet, sour, salt, bitter, and umami here. And what happens is we put the product in our mouth, and then the tastants associated with those basic tastes enter our taste buds, and the taste buds are located in what we know as papillae on our tongue. And papillae are the little red dots you see on our tongues. They're also located in other parts of our oral cavity, but for the most part, when we're putting a food product in our mouth, it's the taste buds that are associated with papillae on our tongue that allow us to be able to perceive those tastes. Now, another thing that we need to bear in mind when we're eating food products is we might be feeling some sort of sensation along with the consumption of the food, and it could be due to what we know as chemical sensations. Maybe there's some burning, or maybe there's some tingling. And these are sensations that are basically perceived because of the trigeminal nerve. So these are often called trigeminal sensations. And it could be the burn from chili powder, or it could be the cooling effect of menthol or mint, or maybe it's because of carbonation. And these sensations are also occurring as we're putting the food product in our mouth. And as we think about it, when we put all these three things together, the tastes, the odors, and the chemical senses, this is what we know as the flavor of the food. So flavor is a combination of all of these sensations. And during sensory testing, we like to dissect our food into these individual components, but most consumers actually look at the flavor as a whole and don't really dissect it unless we're asking them to do it when we're conducting sensory testing. Now, an important sensory modality that I didn't mention when I talked about flavor is basically texture. And texture is the result of touch. And a good definition for texture is all of the rheological or flow and structural. And in the case, it could be the geometric structure, so how that product is formed, or it could be something on the surface. It's all of those attributes that are perceivable by mechanical, tactile, and maybe visual or auditory receptors. And so a good example of where we have a texture that has both mechanical and an auditory sensation is when you think about the crispness of a food product, because crisp products make a sound, and they also have a force associated with them. And so crispness is a really good example of a texture that has multiple components contributing to what we know as crispness of a product. And what you can see is a diagram of all of the different parts of our oral structure and the roles that they can play in us perceiving texture of a food product. Now, when we think about eating food products, all of us do this. All of us are perceiving various things as we eat the product. And so one source of variability that's occurring is all of the individual variability and how it is we perceive things as individuals. And we know that there is variability across demographics, which may be related to genetics, could be related to age, it could be related to the familiarity with the food, and there are other different individual variation factors that do come into play. A lot of my research involves understanding how people who are over the age of 70 are perceiving the sensory properties of food, and we know that other demographics are also perceiving foods differently. We also know that there's individual variation within an individual. So you as an individual are going to perceive things differently based on the time of day, as well as with other things that are going on in your life, particularly interactions with other foods. Now, I want to take a closer look at genetics just really quickly, because genetics is one reason why we have a group of individuals known as super tasters. And so you can see this tongue that is dyed blue, which is the result of a test where we're looking to count the number of fungiform papillae that people have on their tongue. We know that super tasters have a higher number of fungiform papillae. So what happens is researchers will paint the tongue with blue dye, and then they will take a picture of the the tongue, and then they will count the number of papillae that they see when they take a look at the picture. And they use that as a guide to whether somebody could be a super taster. We know that super tasters have a bitter receptor gene, and we know that they're also sensitive to bitter tastes. And there are tests that you can undergo where you give people filter paper that's been infused with a compound known as 6-M-propyl uracil, or a compound known as it's just shortened to PTC, where when people put it on their tongue, if they perceive it to be incredibly bitter, it's quite likely that they're a super taster. We know that about 25% of the population are super tasters, and we know that it means that they're perceiving the sensory properties of food, particularly bitterness, as well as some other sensory properties such as burn and carbonation, a little bit differently to other people. So genetics does play a role in how it is that we're perceiving food. And it also means that when we're conducting sensory testing, we do need to think about the population of people we're recruiting to help us, and maybe undergo some testing to see if they are super tasters so that we can understand the population and the results that they're giving us. So that was my really quick lesson on how you perceive taste. And now I'm just going to quickly talk to you about how we can measure the sensory responses to food. In general, there are three broad categories of tests that we can use. One is to measure consumers, to look at their liking. One is to look at how people can perceive differences in products, and we know this is discrimination testing. And another is to be more analytical and look to see if there are differences between products using a technique called descriptive analysis, where we're training people to be very analytical in how they evaluate the intensity of the sensory properties. And so just quickly to go through these in a little bit more detail, I really like this quote from Haley Turilla, who basically has said that, you know, if you're working in a food company, no food product or beverage is worth producing, distributing, or marketing without at least an approximate idea that its sensory quality is accepted by consumers, because we want to make sure the consumers do like the food product so that they will continue to buy it. We know that a very popular scale to use to measure liking is the 9-point hedonic scale, which ranges from dislike extremely to like extremely. Recently in our lab, we've been exploring the use of emojis to try to understand how people are perceiving different tastes. And so we recently completed a study where we asked people from many different age groups to take a look at a whole list of emojis and figure out what emojis they would associate with each of the basic tastes. We're still in preparation mode of a manuscript, so I'm not going to go into more detail than that, but these are the emojis that we notice people are associating with the different basic tastes. So what have we done in our lab around consumer liking? Quite a long time ago now, I did some research with a student and another faculty member in the department where we wanted to understand how much consumers liked or disliked breads and crackers that were made with different colored wheats. And so in food manufacturing, often white wheat is used to make breads and crackers, but we know that farmers also are looking to grow red wheat because it's less likely to be affected by insect infestation. And but we know that with that red wheat, the reason why it's red is due to phenolic compounds that could be contributing to the sensory properties of the food. So we wanted to understand whether baked goods made with red and white wheat, also ground to different particle sizes, was going to impact the sensory properties and consumer liking of the product. So what we did, first of all, is we ran a very small sensory study with only 76 consumers of crackers, and you can see the crackers in the top corner. The one on the left is the red wheat cracker, and the one on the right is the white wheat cracker. You can see that there's not much difference in color. And we asked people to indicate how much they liked the products overall, their appearance, the flavor, the texture, and how strong the aftertaste was, because we knew that phenolic compounds may be contributing to an aftertaste as well. And what you can see here is the plots of the liking scores. So average liking score for the 4 sensory modalities we talked about ranged from a 5 on the 9-point scale up to a 6 on the 9-point scale, which means that they were falling between neither like nor dislike and like slightly. And what we can see here is that the red wheat cracker was actually liked more than the white wheat cracker. And so moving on from that, if we wanted to know more information, we needed to dig a little bit deeper into understanding consumer responses. And so for that, we conducted a trained panel. In general, a trained panel involves taking a small group of people, usually between 10 and 15, where we select them based on their ability to be good at perceiving sensory properties in products and to describe the sensory properties in products. And we train them. We spend a long time training. In the case of the bread and cracker work, we trained them for about 30 sessions of an hour and a half each, so that they could develop a good understanding of the various sensory properties we were interested in looking at. And they developed a common frame of reference of what weak and strong was for each of these characteristics. And what we did with this information is we looked to see how it could be used, how it could be related to the consumer liking information, but you could also use this to correlate to instrumental results. So in the case of the crackers, we actually had a number of attributes that we looked at. So at the top of this table, you can see we had the basic taste, sweet, sour, salt, bitter. We also looked at astringency, a grain like wheat toasted, and then down at the bottom, you can see some more characteristics. So there were a number of characteristics that these panelists had to test. All of the panelists were trained to understand the definitions for these attributes and also how to evaluate them on a 15-point scale. And when we take a look at the results from this, you can see that this plot shows all of the attributes that were evaluated, but in fact, it was only 2 that showed significant differences in our crackers, where the earthy note was perceived to be stronger in the white wheat cracker, and the white wheat cracker was also perceived to be a harder product than the red wheat cracker. So this does show us that in general, producing with a red wheat versus a white wheat does not really change a lot of the sensory properties. It does change consumer liking. And so what we did is we put it all together in a plot where we overlaid the liking scores with the trained panel scores. And what we ended up with was identifying 3 clusters of consumers. So cluster 1, which is on the right-hand side of the graph, shows that these people preferred products made from white, coarsely ground flour. And the attributes that they really liked in the product were things like toasted, wheaty, grain-like, bran-like, bitter, earthy, sour, coarse. And so they were with those sensory properties. We also had cluster 2, which is in the bottom left, which basically were people who wanted what was probably a sensory property in a refined wheat cracker. So sweet dairy notes. And then at the top, we had cluster 3, which really wasn't associated with any particular type of flour. They just wanted a hard, crisp cracker. So they were really driven by the texture of the product. Now, we know that we can use trained panels in order to characterize the sensory properties, but we also know it takes a lot of time to do this. So recently there have been a lot of novel new ways to characterize the sensory properties of a product that can be done quite quickly. And I'm also quickly running out of time, so I will go through this somewhat quickly. I'm going to show you 3 different techniques that we have been using to characterize the sensory properties of products without using a trained panel. So these all use large groups of consumers who are basically asked to come in and interact with the products in such a way to be able to characterize the sensory properties of the products. And so the first test I'm going to talk about is something that's called sorting, which is exactly what it sounds like. We give panelists the products, and we ask them to sort them into categories of between 2 and 8 groups based on similarities. And then we ask them to describe the products based on their groupings. And so I'm showing you puddings because we did this work with 9 different puddings. Some of them were duplicated because we wanted to look at the reliability of the data collection technique. And what we did is we just asked people to put them into groups based on how similar or dissimilar they thought they were. It's a very straightforward, very simple task. We also with the same group of people, ask them to do what's called a check all that apply test, where they're given the products, they're given a bunch of attributes, and they just identify if the attributes on the list are actually attributes that they perceive in the products. And so in this case, they were given the nine puddings, and they were asked to indicate what was present in terms of appearance, texture, and flavor, and they just took a box. Again, it's very simple, very easy for panelists to do. The last one is a little bit more complicated. It's something that we call projective mapping. And basically what you do is you ask people to group the products based on similarity on a piece of paper. So they taste the products, they put them on the piece of paper according to how similar or dissimilar they are, and then they describe what the products are in terms of similarity, so that we can basically see what kind of words people are using. And at the end of the day, what we have to do is measure the XY coordinates of where each of those samples are and count up the number of times each word is used to describe the product, so that we can get an understanding of what consumers are perceiving in the product. And so when you analyze this data, you end up with something that looks like this. And this can be a little bit complicated to take a look at if you've never looked at one of these before. So what you can see here in color is the name of the puddings that the panelists were asked to evaluate. And then what we have in black with gray dots is the sensory properties that are associated with each of those puddings. So you can see that in the case of the rice pudding, which is on the right-hand side of the screen in yellow, it's basically described as rice, which is probably not surprising because that's what it is. And so this is the CATA result. So the panelists checked the box that said that rice pudding was associated with rice. You can see with cooked up at the top of the graph in blue, that the cooked pudding was described as being eggy and thin. Fat-free was also described as eggy, and all of these words are basically describing the sensory properties of the product. So this doesn't give us a measurement of intensity, but it does give us a measurement of what the product could be characterized as. So you can see in this case that we actually duplicated our vanilla pudding and our white chocolate pudding, and you can see that they fell close together on this graph, which means that our test was reliably able to be reproduced. And you can see that for the projective mapping and for the sorting, we see that the samples are grouped similarly. It looks a little bit different in the map because of how the data is analyzed, but at the end of the day, rice is still described as rice in projective mapping. Rice is a little bit further away in sorting, but they're all still grouping in a slightly similar way. And so that just shows you that there are approaches that you can use where you're not training your panel, but you're still able to characterize your product and get some useful information to move forward to understand how people are perceiving your product. So I have one more slide to show you, and it's basically just to get you ready for the tour you're going to do. When you see the tour, it's basically an empty room, but I want to point out that when we're doing sensory testing, we need to really carefully control all of the presentation of the samples so that everything is the same size and in small portions, the same temperature. We label with 3-digit codes. We use neutral trays in a neutral room, and we make sure that there's positive air pressure in the booth so that no outside odors can get in. And so I realized that this was a very quick lesson in sensory evaluation and a quick trip through sensory evaluation. And I'm happy to answer any questions you have after we see the tour. So Farah, I'm going to pass it over to you, and you can take over.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for the excellent presentation, and thank you for sharing your knowledge and experience. So now we will move into the next part of the presentation, which is a short video that provides overview about the sensory facility at Food Science Department in the University of Guelph.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to our sensory evaluation booths. They are housed in the food in a suite of rooms known as the Human Nutraceutical Research Unit. In this unit, we conduct all types of human trials, and sensory evaluation is just one of them. If you are a panelist taking part in a sensory evaluation trial, you will begin in this room, which is a teaching room by day, but when we're conducting sensory panels, we convert it into the greeting room for our panelists. And what we will do is we will invite people to sit in this room, complete all the documentation required for human ethics, and we will explain the study to them. Once this has been completed, then we will walk them down the hall to where the sensory evaluation booths are actually located. So we will walk them out this door, and we will go down the hall until we enter the formal sensory evaluation training laboratory. And when we enter this room, you will see that we have 8 sensory testing booths. Some of them are wide enough to house wheelchairs, so you can conduct work with people who are in wheelchairs. And they're all outfitted with computers, which we use Sense Cloud to collect the data, and hatches where the samples will come through. So each of our 8 booths are exactly identical with computers, red lights, which we use to mask color differences, and we can also run with white lights if we don't want to show the red lights. Once a panelist is done doing their sensor evaluation trial, they will then leave the room and we will go back to the lecture room where we will pay them for their time and thank them for taking part in this study. If you are a scientist, you're working behind the scenes in the sensory testing area, which consists of the booth area with our 8 booths with the hubby all seated so that we can just slide trays through, and lots of cupboard space and lots of storage space. We also have a formal kitchen, and that kitchen looks exactly like any other kitchen that you will have seen, except it's very white and very clean right now. And you can see that we have lots of different cupboards and counter space so that we can put our sensory panels together and make sure we have enough space to hold our trays. And so that ends the tour of what our sensory evaluation lab looks like. I hope you enjoyed that brief glimpse into life at the University of Guelph in the Food Science Department.
Oops. Farah, next slide. Oops.
Thank you so much. Now we will move to the question part. Please feel free to ask your questions to Lisa, or you can type them in the chat box and I can handle the questions to her. So I have a question from one person. He's asking about, is there any food that is not allowed before doing the sensory evaluation? That could be like having a masking effect in the tongue, or that could be not allowed before doing your sensory evaluation to specific food?
Yeah, that's a good question. What we tell our panelists before we ask them to come in and do our testing is that they avoid drinking coffee or anything strong that is going to leave a flavor in their mouth. And we also ask them to not have cologne or wear any strongly smelling hand creams or anything that will basically leave a scent that will be difficult for people to be able to taste the products.
That's great. And another question, it's about, do you provide sensory evaluation courses or training for companies or food professionals?
I have. Right now, the department does not have a short course on sensor evaluation, but I have done individual training for companies in the past. And so if that's something that somebody is interested in, they can send me an email. And I don't think I left my email address on the front page, but basically, if you look up the Department of Food Science, the University of Guelph, I am there. I'm the only Lisa in the department.
And another question, when you develop a new product, how do you ensure food safety before the sensory evaluation?
Yeah. So sometimes if we're buying the food from a supermarket, we assume it's safe. But if we are developing a product that basically is made in our formulation lab or in our pilot plants, then we would send it out for micro testing to ensure it's safe before we actually do the testing.
And do you test your panelists for super taster status?
It depends on what we're doing, but I have in the past, yes, but it does depend on the test.
And another question, like why the food sample has 3-digit code? Like why it's just 3, not 4 or 5 or 1?
So what we're trying to avoid there is any bias that people might associate with numbering them 1, 2, 3, or even 10, 11, 12, or lettering them ABC. 3-digit codes are hard for people to put in any sort of order, and so that's why we use 3-digit codes.
And another question, is there anything should be like considered for some product, like to heat them a little bit to improve the volatile compounds? Like for example, olive oil or wine should be warm a bit, or you can
Yeah.
maybe rotate.
Yeah, so I've done olive oil tasting in the past, where and I actually was a panelist. I wasn't running the panel. I was a panelist, which was a fascinating experiment to be a panelist instead of a sensory leader. And the samples were warmed to physiological body temperature and they were in glasses with a watch glass over the top that we just lifted off so that the volatiles could be snipped from the samples. And so, yes, if you need to, with trained panels, if you need to heat it up, you heat it up.
Sounds great. So now we will move to the second part or third part of our event today, which is test your knowledge.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Diza and Farah. Now it's the time for the quiz, and are you guys ready? Let me share the screen. Give me a second, please. There are some technical issues.
So during that time, you can get like prepare your phone because you need to scan the QR code that will appear in a few minutes. And then you can go with those questions and then answer them whenever you feel comfortable to answer each question.
Vitushana, do you want me to stop sharing?
Yeah, give me a second.
Also, while you're waiting for Vithushana, just as a reminder, tomorrow is International Women's Day, and CIFST will be hosting an online event, and you will see a link in the chat from Andrew. And he just made it appear. It's like magic.
Yeah, I'm back, and I hope now you can see the screen. You need to scan the QR code and you need to enter the game pin. So we will give you 2 minutes to join and then we will start the quiz. Don't forget, 2 winners will receive the $25 gift vouchers. I will give you 1 more minute to join. If you have any trouble joining, please let me know. I hope everyone has joined. So lock it and let's start. 3, 2, 1. Our first question is, what is retronasal perception? Okay, 6 of them answered correct and around 4 of them not. Don't worry about the scoreboard now. We will check who is in the lead at the end. Let's move to the next question. Approximately what percentage of the population are super tasters? Okay, moving to the next one. Which sensory test is most suitable for detecting small perceptible difference between product samples? Okay, next move to the next question. Which practice is most effective for minimizing bias due to sample presentation? Okay, so the next question is, what is the most important factor to consider when studying differences in the taste perception within the same person? Okay, moving to the next question. Which sensory method is best for evaluating specific attributes using trained panelists? Okay, moving on to the next one. When selecting individuals for a trained sensory panel, the most critical criteria is OR. Moving to the next one. When the aim is to measure liking that captures both extreme and moderate preferences, the optimal tool is. Wow, everyone got it correct. Moving to the next one. Carryover effect in sensory evaluation occur when? That's fast. Moving to the next one. When identifying sensations like burning or cooling caused by chemical stimuli, the most appropriate focus is on. Moving to the next one. When attempting to isolate the influence of color, the best approach is. Moving to the next one. When evaluating consumer liking under natural consumption conditions, the best method is. Moving to the next question. When ensuring data reliability in a trained panel, the most important practice is. Moving to the next question. Sensory threshold refers to, this is our last question though. And now it's the time to see who are the winners. Caroline is the third one. Sabrina got the second. And let's see who is first. It's Rana. Congratulations, our winners, Rana and Sabrina. And congratulations and thank you for all others who participated in this game. So Sabrina and Rana, could you please show us your face? Rana is right over there. Sabrina, if you don't mind, could you please show us your face? Wow, congratulations both.
So could you guys please, congratulations again, and could you guys please just send us your email so we can send you the voucher if you can put them in the chat box? Thank you. So I have a couple of more questions I received during the quiz. So first question is that what's the most common challenges in sensory evaluation and how do you overcome them?
So the biggest challenges in sensory evaluation? Oh gosh. Um, I mean, there are many ways I could answer this question, but I think, for us at the University of Guelph, it's finding panelists who meet the criteria we're looking for. I mean, obviously, if we're doing consumer testing and we're looking for people who are outside of the normal student population, then we have to work very hard to find those people. So we have to do recruiting in the community and we have to find strategies for doing that. That's probably the biggest challenge I see is just finding the right people to do the task.
And another question, how do you handle variability in human perception due to factors such as like age or culture or prior experience?
Yeah, so when we're doing consumer testing, often what we will do is make sure that we're picking the right age group and picking people who are typical consumers of the product. So regardless of what your where you have come from, if you're a consumer of the product, we will take you. With a trained panel, we don't tend to focus so much on that because when we're training people, we're helping to minimize that variability because we're training people to develop a common frame of reference. So often when I'm doing trained panels, I actually it's not even something I take into consideration. I just look for the people who are the best at being able to taste and describe food.
I have a question.
Sure.
Oh, do we have time?
Yeah. Sure.
I have a question for Lisa. So, in the descriptive analysis, do you use with your panelists, do you use QDA or spectrum method? I don't know if you mentioned it, but I'm interested to know, like, which one would you prefer?
I've honestly never used spectrum method. I'm aware of spectrum method, but I know that industry is using it. Like some industries are using it. I've never used that approach. We will often we're not using QDA as much as we're using just a generic descriptive analysis. So we're focused on the characteristics of interest to us and not the entire sensory profile of the product.
So you would focus only on texture, let's say, for a specific research.
Yeah, but it really, it does really depend on what I'm looking for as to how I approach it. But yeah, I've not gone down the spectrum route, but I understand its value because it's useful for people to be able to compare across years and within different locations. I've just never had the need to do that.
Okay, thank you.
And the last question is that, based on your experience, which sensor attributes are the most challenging to measure and why? Based on your experience.
The most challenging to measure. So I'm going to assume that's with the trained panel because with the consumer panel, we basically just ask what consumers are perceiving. With a trained panel, to train a panel to evaluate different types of characteristics, what one would be the most challenging? Well, I can tell you that when I was working with the wheats, the one we actually found really difficult was earthy. because we couldn't find a good reference for earthy, and we couldn't get everybody to agree on it. And we tried everything from looking at what compounds are contributing to earthy flavors right through to just digging dirt out of the ground and seeing if that is, and having people smell it to see if that's what we could use as earthy. So one there's not one specific characteristic. I think within a panel, there's usually one that causes you challenges. And then what you have to do is figure out how you are going to find a good reference to be able to train the panelists to evaluate it.
I'm sorry to ask one more question, but this is the last question. So someone is asking, like, do you provide sensory analysis service for the food industry, for example?
So will we conduct sensory testing for the industry on a consulting basis? That can be really tricky on the university campus because we have to apply for ethics approval to be able to do that. And right now, our ethics approval process is long. It's about 4 months right now to be able to get ethics approval, and often industry wants to work faster than that. So I have done sensory testing for industry, but it's rare because of the requirements of needing ethics approval.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I will handle it now to Shanna. Thank you so much, Lisa, for your time and answering all these questions. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem, Farah.
All right, I think it's the good time to wrap up the session. Thank you, Lisa, for providing us insights into sensory testing, and thank you everyone for joining today's session. I hope everyone enjoyed the discussion and also learned something new. It was great having you all of you participate. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Have a good evening.